All right. So, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Social Hour. My name is Claire Richardson, and I'm the founder of Preserving with Purpose. Preserving with Purpose records the life stories of individuals on video in order to preserve their stories, their memories, and wisdom for their family and future generations. We are here today live doing our Facebook Lives for our Social Hour. It's a time for our followers to be able to hear someone's personal story that you may be able to personally relate to. Our goal with the Social Hour is to show you not only how we work, but to have fun and to share in wisdom that you can utilize in the moment that you're in today. So today we are here with Teresa Funke, and she is the owner of Teresa Funke and Company, Victory House Press, and Bursts of Brilliance. She is an award-winning author of 7 novels for adults and children based on true stories from World War II, which is so amazing and so exciting. She's also the author of Bursts of Brilliance for a Creative Life, both the book and the popular blog. She is also a nationwide speaker offering keynotes and presentations and a popular writing consultant. So thank you so much for being here with us, Teresa. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it too.
Yeah, well, let's get started. So let's talk about where you're from. Basic question.
Okay. I'm from Boise, Idaho. I was born and raised there. And when I was 25, my husband and I moved to Colorado with HP, and we've been here for 28 years.
That's amazing. So welcome and glad we're here in Colorado.
Yes.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I think like a lot of kids, I wanted to be a lot of things. I cycled through a lot of different things when I was growing up. For a while there, I was pretty passionate about the thought of being an archaeologist until I realized that as an archaeologist, you are often hot and dirty and there's bugs and scorpions and stuff. And then I kind of decided, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So, but the one thing that was consistent through my childhood and my teenage years was wanting to be a writer. I knew I wanted to be a writer. And so that was the one thing I kept coming back to.
That's amazing. So I know that we're going to talk more about, the details of how you got there and things that deterred you, but put you on a different path. But before we do that, I really want to talk about you as an author and the career that you have and kind of what all that encompasses.
Hmm. So yeah, so I mean, as an author, I think um, artists don't have a particular path that they follow that, some people know from the time they're in high school or college what they're going to do with their lives. Let's say they want to be a physical therapist and they know I got to get a certain amount of training and then I'm going to go work for somebody else and then maybe I'll have my own practice someday. And it's kind of a set career path. Whereas with the arts, we don't have that. We kind of have a project that we want to do. Like for me, I wanted to write the great American novel and be on the bestseller list. And you kind of focus on that and then you think, well, if that happens, then who knows, maybe there'll be a movie deal, maybe there'll be more book deals and I'll have a career. But it all feels really like it's very dependent on that first project. And so for us, we just kind of follow along where the path leads. And for me, I finished my books and then I published them myself. And so once I did that, I became a business owner. So first I was a writer, then I was a business owner, not something that I thought I was ever going to be. And then people ask you to speak about your book. So you become a speaker. And then they ask you to teach classes about writing and you become a teacher. And then people wanted more one-on-one work with me. So you become a writing coach. And then further down the line, I became a blogger, not something I ever thought I would do. And so I've been blogging for 6 years now. So kind of the fun of having an arts-based business is that we don't really know where it's going and the opportunities come along and we take them. And that's kind of like our superpower is being able to be flexible enough to see where is my business going? What am I going to do next?
Well, and that's got to be such an exciting part of it because you think sometimes your path is, I'm going to write this book and that's going to be it. And you think that I'm going to get these other things. But when it spirals off into all these little other pieces and not little, but just amazing opportunities, it's got to be so exciting for you.
It is. It's really exciting. And like I said, I think that that's what makes arts-based businesses so innovative is that we can wait for those opportunities. You're not going to find artists that have 5-year and 10-year plans, because you're lucky if you can get us to do a 1-year plan, because every 6 months something might come up that we didn't see coming. I didn't think I would ever have a one-woman show, which I do based on my book. I'm doing a play version of one of my children's books now. We're wrapping up a Spanish translation of another book. It's like, these were not things that I anticipated coming my direction. So for artists, we purposely stay flexible so that we can take our business in the new directions that even the technologies are going, even the trends are going, and we can jump on those bandwagons because we are flexible businesses. So
Yeah. So amazing. So with that, I kind of want to go backwards because
uh-huh.
I think, like you spoke about, you have a plan when you're in high school or college of, I'm going to be a writer, and you're not really sure how that path is going to get there, but you're going to be a writer. You're going to write this novel. And so I'd love for you to talk to us about what that path looked like, the deterrence that led you to a different path, but still, somewhat close to it, or the successes that you had and what that looked like.
Sure. So I'll back up a little bit because I know you like this story. When I was in the 5th grade, I was given the assignment to write a poem. And for some reason, this poem was just super important to me. I don't know why, but I really wanted to get this right. And I stayed up past my bedtime, and I got in trouble with my mother, and I turned the poem in. And the next day, the teacher called me up in front of the entire class, and she said, "You did not write this poem. No 5th grade student could write a poem this good. You must have copied it out of a book. Now you go back and write this yourself, or you're not getting a grade." And I was mortified. It was one of those awful moments where you're embarrassed, you're angry, you're about to cry, the other kids are making fun of you. And then I had this really interesting revelation as I sat at my desk. I thought, wow, I must be a really good writer. And then I had found something that I was good at and I enjoyed doing. And so I did it all through junior high and high school, and my teachers were always very encouraging. And everybody said, you need to be a writer when you grow up. And they published my work, and they sent me to the Young Writers Conference. And then when I got to be a senior in high school, and people would say, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I'd say, I'm going to be a writer. Then all of a sudden everything changed. And people were like, that's not a job, that's a hobby. So the first deterrent was just people saying, you can't do that. That can't be your job. You can't be a writer. But the other deterrent then was when I did start my business, people said, you're a liberal arts major. Liberal arts majors can't run businesses. You don't know what you're doing. You won't succeed. When I self-published my books and started my own press, all of my traditionally published friends told me, you will sink your career self-publishing. This was back in 2002. I said, I don't think so. I think things are changing. And now my entire career has been based on the fact that I'm a self-published author. So there were plenty of times along the way where people told me, you can't do this. And for some bizarre reason, I'm just one of those people who's motivated by the word can't more than I am by the word can even. So when somebody says to me, you can't do this, it won't work, it will fail, there's a part of me that kind of sits up and says, did you just say can't? And then I have to go out and prove that it can be done, even if it is something that was not done well before or by other authors or hasn't been done in our industry. For me, that's part of the challenge, is to say, can we make this work? And why isn't it working? So there's been plenty of deterrents, lots of them. But I think for some reason that always just kind of felt like a challenge to me.
Yeah. I love that you say that, because I think that, looking back on that, there's so many people who have been told that they can't, or they'll never amount to anything, or, whatever that looks like. And I think, unfortunately, probably a lot of our society takes that and then they just throw that in the wastebasket and they move on with the path that, everybody else is telling them to do. And for those who are motivated by it, which, you said that can't really motivated you. Can you talk about like the successes and how that made you feel then when you were able to overcome those obstacles, and maybe the path that it then led you on, even though maybe it wasn't what you thought?
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think I have sort of an interesting attitude about the word failure. Like, I don't think there's any such thing as failure. I mean, I've definitely launched programs and done even some products that just didn't really go anywhere. But I feel like, for me, redefining failure is that it isn't that it failed, it's that it didn't quite work.
Yeah.
which means that oftentimes, if I work at it a little more and I work the kinks out of it, sometimes I can get those things that initially didn't do well to actually take off, and eventually they might even become a staple in my business. But other times, yeah, you realize this wasn't something that was going to work, but I learned a lot from the process. And that learning has been critical. When you're an entrepreneur, you learn as much, if not more, from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And so for me, I think a big part of it is just having an attitude that there's no such thing as failure and there's no such thing as wasted effort,
Yeah.
because everything you try teaches you something and you learn from it. And you even learn what you don't want to do, which is important too, right? So I raised my kids with that thought. There's no such thing as wasted effort. Whatever you do in life, it's going to somehow lead you to the next thing. You just don't see it yet.
Yeah. I love that. I'm gonna have to write that down so I continue and ingrain that into my children's head for sure, because I love that. I do agree with you in so many aspects of, it's maybe you don't get it right the first time, but if you keep working at it, you'll find the way that will work, or with the group of people who it fits for, or whatever that may look like. So it's so encouraging to hear you say that, and to just hear the trials and tribulations and then the success that come on the flip side of that. So
Yeah. There's even been times when I've developed something and the timing just wasn't right. Um, and then 4 or 5 years later, I remember it, and now the timing is right, and I can bring it back out and sort of resurrect it. And so when you stay in the business long enough, you realize that nothing you've done is, like I said, there's no wasted effort. It all kind of comes back around somehow, which is really fun too.
yeah, yeah,
So,
that's amazing, and I just love the hearing. I appreciate you telling me the story with that, because I think so many people can relate to that piece of it as well.
yeah,
So let's kind of go forward a little bit. Through your career, you've written books about World War II, and
right.
you've written them for kids and adults, which I think the fact that you've written World War II books for kids, that's something that just really spoke to me, because, I think a lot of, I look at my husband, he's super interested in World War II and the wars and reading about those personal stories. But, our younger generation is typically learning about those events through history books or their history teachers. And so for you to be able to write those books for children and speak to them, first of all, I applaud you. I think that's so amazing. So I would love for you to talk about what the inspiration was for you writing those books geared towards kids.
Sure. Yeah. So my first books, and I actually have them here, so I'll just show them. The first book was a novel, and it was called Remember Wake. And it's based on a true story of the men that were taken prisoner by the Japanese at the beginning of Pearl Harbor. And it's an adult book, and it has some challenging aspects to the story. The men were in prison camps in Japan and China for the entire war, so it's a sometimes a hard to read story. And it was written for adults. And then my second book is Dancing in Combat Boots, which is women's stories from World War II. And this is all of my books are based on real people that I've interviewed. So in that book, it's 10 different women that I interviewed that were telling their stories. In the first book, it was 13 men and women that I based the book on.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really assumed that I would be somebody who wrote fiction for adults. That was my plan for my career. It never occurred to me to write books for children, but I started getting invited to go into classrooms, mostly fifth grade classrooms of kids, to talk about writing in World War II. Well, what would happen is that we wouldn't get much to the discussion about writing, because I'd go into these classrooms and these kids would know nothing about World War II. So they'd never heard of Pearl Harbor, they'd never heard of Adolf Hitler, they've never heard of World War II at all. And so I would spend most of my time answering a million questions about the war. And at one of the schools, one of the kids said, "Mrs. Funk, this is so interesting. Like, why don't you write something for us kids so we can learn more?" And I just kind of laughed it off. And I was like, "I'm not a children's book writer. I don't know how to write for children." And then within a week, I had a concept for the Homefront Heroes series,
Oh my
which
goodness.
is a series of books. It's a multicultural series, and it's based on, each book is based on a real person that I interviewed. And so I started to write those books, but first I had to back up and learn how to write middle grade books for children. And then I wrote the first book, which was doing my part, and then I wrote the subsequent books. So they look like this. This is V for Victory, and this is the book that we're translating into Spanish. And this is the No No Boys. This one's very popular with teachers because it's about the Japanese internment story. So there's 5 books altogether, and they're each based on a person that I interviewed, so the kids can read in the back of the book about the real person that the story is based on. And these people are not heroes, they're not famous, they're regular people like you and me that stepped up when they were children to help us win the war. And I think that's a pretty powerful message for kids, that they can make a difference. They can really do something powerful, even though they're, quote, just kids, right?
Yeah, and I love that you did that because I think that, kids obviously if they can hear those stories, they build their confidence off of that. I think that there's such a huge confidence builder in that, and it's a focus on a positive, or that somebody went through a hard time but made it through. And I think that you being able to have that in a format that can really show them those stories is so amazing. And I want you to talk about, because one thing I loved, and when I was going through it with my daughter Shelby, at the end it was like, if you were friends with so and so, this is what you would do. And I love that part of it. So what inspired you to incorporate that portion of the book?
Yes. Well, by this point, I was pretty, I'd published 2 books on my own with my own press, and I knew that I could do some really special things with these children's books. So I never did send the children's books out to any other publishers, because I wanted to have those sections in the back of the book. And one is Meet the Real Homefront Hero, where they get to meet the real person that I interviewed. And
Yeah.
then if you'd been friends with the main character in this book, what would you have done during the war? And so in the first book, it's victory gardens and going to the troop trains to greet the soldiers. And in other books, it's Saturday matinees and scrap metal drives and writing to soldiers. And so I wanted kids to see that during World War II, President Roosevelt himself said to the children, the men are fighting, the women are working, we need you to step up and help us win this war. And it was a time in our history when we expected children to go collect scrap metal, to collect fats and greases, to take care of their little brothers and sisters while everyone else was working. We asked a lot of kids at that time period, and they stepped up and they did it. And that really inspires kids today, to think that there was a time when we had that much belief that kids could be that responsible. And they're very, very inspired by that.
Yeah, I didn't know that he had said that, and I just think that that is, I don't know, that's got to make such an impact. And it makes me think about our generation that came up, and how um, just kind of how they were compared to even our kids now today. Do you see a lot of difference in the generation there, with just even with that message?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we've gotten to a stage, and kids know it, where we're very protective of our children, and for some good reasons. But this was a time period when you would turn your kids loose in the morning, and you would say, "Be home by lunch," and you didn't know where they were and what they were doing, and they were running around the neighborhood collecting anything that they could find made out of metal to try to help the war effort. Right? They were going around with their friends and trying to do good in the community, but they were also getting into some mischief. And I think kids find it really interesting that there was a time when we allowed that kind of freedom to children, and also had expectations of them. They were expected to do their chores, and if the victory garden was their chore, their family was counting on that food. There
Yeah.
was rationing in this country, so you didn't let your chores slide because your family was counting on you. And I think kids understand that today, that there was a certain expectation we had of children, and we knew they could do it. We put our confidence in them, and for the most part they did. And I think they find that very fascinating today.
Yeah, that is so cool. I love that. Oh my gosh. Yeah, thank you. So I was going to ask a question about that. I mean, with your personal, or capturing these stories for the books, was there anyone in your life that you wrote about, or that influenced any of your writing at all?
Well, it's funny because all my books are based on real people that I've interviewed, and the first people I actually met, they lived in Boise, and they had been civilian contract workers on Wake Island. And here I'd grown up in Boise. I was a history major, and I never knew this story about these men who'd been taken prisoner on Wake Island. So here they were, in essence, kind of my neighbors in my town, and I'd never encountered them before. So that book, they were not friends or relatives, but I got to know them, and I got to go into their homes and meet them, and attend some coffees with them. And then the Dancing in Combat Boots does have a story in it about my great aunt. who was a Mexican-American woman, and she ran her brother's grocery store during World War II. So for him to have turned his store over to a woman in the first place was a bit unusual. Even she wasn't sure she could do it. But for a woman in a position of power in a macho neighborhood, that was kind of a new line for women to walk. And so that's my great aunt in that book. And then the book V for Victory is actually loosely based on my uncle, who was a child helping in those grocery stores. And so you get to meet him at the end of the book. But all of the other books are just people that I met through my training as a historian to kind of go find who's the best source for this story.
So, writing all these stories, have you found that one person in particular, and I know that's probably hard, but has really influenced or even shaped your life going forward?
I am very attached and I deeply love every single one of the people who was a source for my books. And so when kids say, "What's your favorite book that you've written?" I can't really answer that. But there was one woman who, something she said did change the course of my life. And she was an artist in World War II. She's in Dancing in Combat Boots. She sketched wounded soldiers in their hospital beds and also soldiers at the USOs. And she sketched 3,000 men.
Oh my goodness.
And so for a lot of these men, it was the last likeness they had of themselves before they went back to the war and back to battle. And it was such an inspiring story. She was in 90, closing in on 90 when I met her, and trying to figure out what she was going to do with all of these portraits. And she told me that her mother always used to say when she was growing up, "We make the things that matter matter." We choose in our own lives what matters. And it doesn't really matter if it matters to anyone else, because what matters to us, we make it matter.
Right.
And that became like the motto for my business. So the kind of the tagline for Teresa Funke Company is, "We make it, what matters matter."
Yeah.
And that's how I have approached my entire career, which is, if I think it matters, I'm going to do it. You
Right.
know, whether I think it's going to be one of my big money making revenue streams, or if I think it's just important, if I think it matters, I'm going to do it. And I'm going to make all the work that I do matter. And so she did. She changed my life with that quote.
Yeah. Whatever happened, I have to ask, with her paintings or her drawings?
She found a university in Florida that took the drawings, thank goodness.
Yes.
And so they have a collection now there of her.
What an amazing thing. Is there any way for people to see that, or is it online, or just at that?
I don't think that the pictures themselves are online. I did find an article about her when she donated it. I think it was the University of Tampa, I want to say, that I found. Her name was Dabney Shearer, Mildred Dabney Shearer. And I did find an article about the donation, and it had one or two pictures, but I don't know that you can go view all of the portraits. I have a couple of them just that I was able to get. And I use one of them as a prop when I do the one woman show, which I don't do very often, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's fascinating.
Well, it's so amazing, and what an impact she made. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't realize. And I'm so glad you shed light on, is that, you didn't have to be a hero. A lot of people were just stay at home, taking care of the kids, or going back to work and helping.
Yeah.
And that was their war effort. And a lot of times that stuff got misplaced. And so when you focused on the women, I know your book, The Dancing in Combat Boots, does it focus more on what the women's role is, correct? And can you talk
Right.
about that?
Yeah. Now, when I was working on that book in the early 90s was when I was doing most of the interviews, early mid 90s. Most of these women had never told their story. In 50 years, 50 plus years, they'd never told their stories, even to their own families, because no one had ever asked. And some of them were married to men who'd won medals in the war. And they'd be like, "Oh, you must want to talk to my husband." Oh, no, I want to talk to you.
Yeah.
So I wanted to find out, when I was writing my novel, Remember Wake, it was really hard to find information about what it felt like to be a woman during World War II. At the time, there were lots of statistical books that said 6 million women entered the workplace, but there wasn't a lot of like oral histories and that sort of thing that could tell me what it felt like to be a woman. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to talk to them about, what does it feel like to have a husband who's a prisoner of war and you don't know if he's even alive? What does it feel like to be a WASP flying planes for the military but not being treated as an equal? What does it feel like to be an African American woman in the Army and be segregated by race and gender? Or a Japanese American woman in an internment camp and you've lost everything? And so these were the types of women I wanted a multicultural, different socioeconomic classes. I wanted a real representation of what it felt like to be a woman, that in the experiences that we didn't typically hear about.
Yeah. Well,
So
definitely learning. I mean, you learn probably from everything that you're doing, and I can see that. So, from that book in particular, was there anything that you really learned or enjoyed, or words of wisdom that you captured from those moments with those women?
absolutely. I remember I can still hear their voices in my head all these years later. They're very, very much present to me, these women. They've all passed away now, but they're very present to me still. And I think one of the things that amazed me the most in all of my interviewing was I would talk to people and they would say, "Wait, I mean, you don't want to talk to me. I'm just an ordinary person. I mean, I really did have just a pretty ordinary experience during World War II." And I'm thinking, I don't think it's ordinary to run a grocery store when women were not typically allowed to do that. I don't think it's ordinary to be a 14-year-old girl working in a war factory. You
Yeah.
know, I don't think it's ordinary to be in a Japanese internment camp. And so most of these people that I talked to, the first response they gave me was, "Well, I mean, you can probably find somebody better than me. I was just an ordinary person." And then as we talked and they were able to see, "Hey, I just made a whole book out of you," or in Dancing in Combat Boots, a whole short story out of you. Look how not ordinary you really are.
Yeah.
And, I've had the luxury in my life of interviewing a lot of people who thought that their lives were just ordinary, not even the ones that made it into the book, and being able to show them, see, there's nothing ordinary about anyone.
Yeah.
We're all extraordinary in our own way. So,
Thinking about that now, and I kind of try to put myself into the footsteps because I get that with clients that we get, hired to interview, and we go and we meet with them, and same thing, the mom or the dad or the grandma or the grandpa is, "Oh, I don't have a story, I don't know why, you want to talk to me." And 3 hours later, they're kind of in the same boat of, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I can't believe I forgot about this," or whatever it was, and they start to realize their story. So fast forward, 40 years, when you and I are in our 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever it may be. And what do you think you'll think if your kids came and said, "Hey, tell me your story"? Do you think that you would feel the same way, that, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal, I just lived an ordinary life"? What would your words be to them?
oh gosh, that's a really good question. I don't think I've had an ordinary life. I really don't. I think there's different definitions of success. So, did I achieve that original goal of being a best-selling writer who wrote the great American novel and won a ton of awards? No. And I could have let that get me down and I could have let that make me resentful. But instead, I'm looking at this body of work I've done and the privilege I've had of being able to do so many things that I just felt were important and I felt like they mattered. And I made them matter and I did them. And I've got 8 books and I've got plays and all kinds of things. And so I think, my advice to my grandchildren will be someday that you've got to follow your gut instinct. You have to follow that voice from your higher self because it's leading you down your path, regardless of what looks like to success to other people. The only success that matters is how you define it yourself. And for me, I feel like I've had a successful life and I don't feel like it's been an ordinary life. But that's partly because I chose to not make it ordinary. I chose to do what I wanted to do. And I had the privilege of being allowed to do that. So, yeah.
Yeah. So with that, I think success is defined so many different ways, and obviously that evolves too over the time period that we walk this earth. A lot of times we get out of college and we say success is, making $100,000 and getting that dream job. So for you, how has success changed from the early days of graduating to now, and what does that look like?
Um, that's a good question. So, I think in the early days, like I said, y- my view of success was based on what other people thought of me. It was based on when that first book came out, are people going to like it? Is it going to get good reviews or is it going to win an award? I was looking for personal validation.
Yeah.
And that was a big part of it in the early part of my career. I think in some ways that's going to be true of everybody, that you're looking for those confidence builders that, yeah, I'm good at this. I can do this. I know what I'm doing. And then as you get further into your career and you start to see, what are the things that you're really good at? And there are a lot of things that that I'm sort of known for. I'm an ideator, so I come up with new ideas that nobody's tried before. Some of them work, some don't, but it's really exciting and people are very intrigued by that. And so in order to be an ideator, you have to be willing to take a lot of chances. And I think the longer you stay in it, and I think that would be my advice to people starting out, is that you're in this, if you love what you're doing, you're in it for the long game. And we tend to be so focused on, oh, have I met that next step yet? I said I was going to do this by the time I was 25. I said I was going to do this by the time I was 30. It doesn't really matter if you're in it for the long game, because hey, by the time I'm 80 years old, looking back on my life, will I have gotten to a lot of those places? Yeah, well, maybe it takes a little longer than you thought it would. It took me 10 years to get my first book out. If you had told me that when I started, I probably would have quit.
Right.
Right? So I think that's it. You just have to remember that you're in it for the long game and there's going to be ups and downs, but in the end, you're going to look back and you're going to say, I'm so glad I did that. All ups and downs aside, I'm so glad I had the career I had.
Yeah, which brings us kind of back to like walking backwards of finding your path. You look at those moments and see that had you known it would take 10 years, you would have given up. But, thankfully we can't see into the future, and being able to just work off of motivation and things that light our fire can really get us to, and sometimes it's not the place that we think, but it's the place where we're being led, and that is just the right place where we need to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have high ambition. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people that have inspired me who started out by saying, I was just a housewife.
yeah.
And then when you hear the things that they did in their life with their children, with their families, in their community, it's very inspiring. It's like, wow, you had a really successful life. And they're like, I did. But there were a lot of women, particularly in the generation that I was talking to, that would be their response to me. Well, I was just a housewife.
Yeah.
But to be that while your husband was off at war was a tremendous challenge. And those women were just as inspiring to me as the ones who had, been trailblazers. So I think that's the other thing too, is just to say, look at your life and look at what you've contributed. You're here for a reason. And you probably have done more than you realize you've done. And you've made more of an impact, I can guarantee you, than you think you have.
Yeah. Which, tagging on to that, I would encourage people to ask one of their closest, loving friends or family members, checking in with them almost every month of like, hey, how have I contributed? Or what do you find in me that I do for you that no one else does? Because, sometimes getting that affirmation of not thinking you're good enough, or that you haven't gone down the right ways, of having other people incorporate that into your life too, can be very empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so I mean, we've answered so many questions about the challenges and some of those big events. Um, so I kind of want to go into, what tips do you have for others looking back on your life and shaping it on where they should be today and their direction on life going forward? So I know you kind of covered some tips, but do you have any other tips along the way of kind of what you've gone through and the encouragement of continuing to go no matter what up or down they go through?
Hmm. I think again, it just comes back to identifying what matters to you, and that version of success. Like in this country, and it's not necessarily this way in every country, but in this country, a big definition of success is money. Like how much money have you made? And we define whether or not a project is successful based on money. But I was just telling my husband this the other day. I said, you read the obituaries, and sometimes you'll read an obituary about somebody who had a job and they worked 35 years at a tech company, and maybe they had a family, and that's the obituary, and you go, well, that's good, that's a solid life, that's a good solid life, that's a good thing. They probably had a good income and were able to contribute to the community in a certain way. And then you read another obituary, and it says, this person ran the junior league for 35 years. They started this project in the community. They did this at their church. They did, and you think, wow, look at all the things that person did. What a lot of contributions they made and how many people they touched. And then it occurs to you, that person didn't get paid for any of those things.
Right.
And yet, what a successful life. And so I think one of the things we need to get over in this country is the definition of success being how much money have you made and how successful are you in that sense, because there's a lot of people who've contributed a lot and had really meaningful lives that didn't necessarily make a lot of money. And so once we remove that, we're going to see that the definition of success really changes a lot.
Yeah. How, this might be a tough question, but how do you think we change that?
I think, well, part of it is actually through work that you're doing or I'm doing, which
Yeah.
is preserving the stories of ordinary people and showing the contributions that people have made. And, we're kind of understanding now in this pandemic that we're in that there isn't really any such thing as a non-essential, worker. Like people who we would normally not have paid any attention to, people who are janitors in a hospital or stocking shelves in a grocery store, they're now essential workers. Like we
Right.
value them, we're grateful for them, we need them. So maybe it will change people's attitudes about who really matters. It isn't just the CEOs of companies who matter. It's the people who work for them who matter, and they have their stories too. And so I think that's really going to be really powerful as we move forward. You and I both doing the work we do. Let's tell those stories and let's celebrate people who in the past would have been overlooked.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I love what you said, showcasing ordinary people, because
Yeah.
I think that, I know for me, when I hear the story of not a famous celebrity or, something, but just hearing someone else that is similar to me in the same situation, there's so much relation there, and you feel so much more empathy and confidence and, likeness, that where you can really create kind of a community around that and build the things that you need, because you're like, oh my gosh, there's somebody else going through the same thing or like me, and they had an extraordinary life to what they thought was ordinary, so maybe mine isn't that ordinary. So
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
So we're obviously in the pandemic COVID-19 situation now, and you had a great blog post that a dear friend had sent to me, and it just really touched so many aspects of what we're doing, and I wanted you to kind of talk about that and the advice that you would have for people during this pandemic.
Sure. What I was talking about in that blog post is just that as a historian, I could not have written the books that I wrote or the articles that I wrote or anything had I not been able to access those first person accounts. So the interviews that I did with people who'd lived through it, but also oral histories, letters, journals. As historians, we have always relied so strongly on our understanding being based on what people left behind. And I was worrying a little bit in that blog post about if you're just communicating via text or email or messages on Facebook, those might get lost. And we might not have a solid understanding as historians of what this pandemic was really like for people. So, what I was encouraging people to do was journal. Maybe if you've never journaled before, please journal about what you're going through now. I have a friend who's filled 4 journals in the 40 some days that we've been at home. That's incredible. So, journals, maybe write a letter to somebody and type it out on your computer versus just sending it an email. Save it. Like save some of your emails. I have a file where I'm saving emails that people have sent me and I've sent them about this crisis.
Yeah.
Maybe write a poem, write a song based on what you're thinking and feeling right now. And so tap into your feelings, but don't put them in those impermanent places. People are making videos just for fun to be silly, but they're not even saving those. Maybe you make a video where you do intend for it to be saved and to help record what's going on. So there's lots of ways we can record our feelings, our thoughts, our experiences during this time. And it's going to be really, really critical to the understanding of our children and grandchildren, to what we went through and how we got where we are, what we learned from it, how we got stronger because of it. We're lucky to have all that from World War II. And that's how I've been able to do what I do. And I would like to see that happen during this time as well.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So for you, are you doing a lot of journaling right now, and do you dedicate a specific time to do that? What does that look like in your day?
My thoughts and feelings about this have been coming out in my blog
Mhm.
and my newsletters. My newsletters have a different, a different greeting. So they've been coming out that way. And then I've been doing regular updates to family. And because that's one way for me to not only keep in touch with family, but to record what's going on with me and my children, my grown children, and I'm saving all of those.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I'm doing for my journaling, is those emails that are going to the family. And it's serving a double purpose because we're all wanting to be really connected. We're all worried about each other right now. So it's allowing me to fill them in and also express my feelings and what's happening to us during this crisis. So that's my choice, but I have a lot of writer friends who are definitely journaling a lot. They're definitely doing things like writing poems, because our feelings and our emotions are strong right now, and we need a place to put them.
Yeah. I love that you said that, because I think so often, we've been in that society where we see each other and we say, hi, how are you? And it's good. And
Right.
I feel like sometimes we're still in that. So being able to kind of freely write something, whether you send it to someone or not, and keeping it for yourself, still getting those emotions and those feelings about where you're at right now, is such a good way of getting it out and not keeping it in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we greatly appreciate your time that you took with us today. I learned so much about you, and I just absolutely love and adore everything that you're doing. I think that it's so impactful, the books that you're writing and the history and the stories that you're capturing of these people, so that not only adults can enjoy it, but so much more importantly, that the children can really understand our history and have a one-on-one connection with these people. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing, because I was very excited to find out about what you were doing as well. One of the things I do as a speaker is encourage people to please record your stories for your kids and your grandkids. And you don't have to wait. A lot of people feel like, oh, I have to wait till towards the end of my life
Yeah,
so that I have more, because it just feels like something that you would do when you're towards the end of your life, but you don't have to do that. You can do it when you're in your 50s. You can do it. You still have plenty of story to tell and things that you want to remember and record. And so I've been a big proponent for a long time of people doing exactly what you are helping them do right now, which is critical, because a lot of people don't know how to get started on their own. And so you're providing a really valuable service.
well, thank
So
you. I appreciate it. Well,
yeah.
I am so excited. Hopefully, we get to work together a lot more in the future. And before we go, though, I do want to ask your burst of brilliance. Do you want to talk about that? Because I think that, you're doing a lot of blogging on that side, correct?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Burst of Brilliance is the new book, and it's a nonfiction book, and it's based on my blogs that I did for 6 years, and it just kind of took on a life of its own and got very exciting. And so Bursts of Brilliance has its own website, and the blog lives there. And we do a lot of really great inspirational social media. The book is about tapping into your inner artist, and yes, everyone has an inner artist, and your higher self and your creativity. And it's just a very inspiring book to help you be creative and live that creative life. And so that's on burstofbrilliance.com.
Okay.
And then teresafunk.com, TeresaFunke.com. That's where you'll find tons of really great, fun information about my books. You'll get to see the real people we based the books on. You'll get to learn lots of writing resources and information for writers, because that's a passion area of mine too. So really great content on the teresafunk.com site as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. And when we finalize all of the interview, I will make sure to incorporate your websites and any other information that we can put up there about you and where to find you, because you're
Thank
just doing
you.
amazing things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for being here today. We hope that you stay safe and just have a great rest of your week.
You too. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
You're welcome.